Hello, and welcome back to Mr. B Teaches History. Today we'll examine the events central to the presidency of George Washington and the precedents he set as our first president. Oftentimes, we start the history of the United States as a nation at the Declaration of Independence, but it's my belief that this is the true start of American history because it's the work of the nation under the 1787 Constitution, where we actually start as a United States instead of just states united. So let's get to it. The first job of the first U.S. Congress and its presidents was to establish and organize the newly minted federal government. Washington started by establishing, with Congress, 4 executive departments to help enforce the laws passed by Congress. Then he appointed, with the consent of Congress, the secretaries for those departments. For the Department of War, he appointed Revolutionary War General Henry Knox. Thomas Jefferson was recalled from France to head the Department of State. Washington's right-hand man, Alexander Hamilton, led the Department of the Treasury. Lastly, former Governor of Virginia, Edmund Randolph, was the chief lawyer of the United States as the Attorney General for the Department of Justice. The other big act of Congress was the establishment of the federal court system. They created the United States Supreme Court with 6 judges and a system of 13 district trial courts, 1 for each state, and 3 circuit courts of appeal. 6 judges of the Supreme Court would actually ride on one of the circuits, ruling on appealed cases until the mid-1800s. George Washington had to deal with several foreign issues as president. First, the French requested aid from their ally in their wars spitting out of the French Revolution. This caused conflict within Washington's advisors, but we'll talk more about that later. In response, Washington issued a proclamation of neutrality because it wanted to trade with France and the British. He also argued that the United States was not strong enough to engage in another war this early in its history. Washington even deported a French citizen attempting to find American volunteers to help fight with the French. The United States also had several problems with the British, too. First, they kidnapped American sailors to fight in their wars against France, in an act known as impressment. Secondly, they had still not evacuated the forts of the western frontier. Washington sent Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and Federalist author John Jay to negotiate a treaty about these issues. He did it and it was ratified by the Senate, but it was never fully enforced by the United States dealt with those issues until the second decade of the 1800s. Lastly, Charles Pinckney negotiated a treaty with the Spanish to open the lower Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans for trade with no taxes. On the home front, Washington dealt with several issues. First, the Native American Indians allied together and resisted the American settlers who were moving westward, with the encouragement of the British. There were several battles between state militias and the natives, but they were eventually defeated at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. This led to the passage of the Treaty of Greenville, in which the Native American Indians peoples gave up their claims to the Ohio Territory. Secondly, there was a tax rebellion in Pennsylvania when the federal government placed a tax on distilled whiskey to make up for the revenue loss from a lower import tax. This mostly affected poor farmers, so they attacked the federal tax collectors. In response, Washington and Hamilton led a force of 15,000 militia against the protesters, who surrendered when they arrived. Lastly, Washington and Congress created a Public Lands Act in 1796 to provide a procedure for dividing and selling lands under the jurisdiction of the federal government. This is one of the main ways the government made money in the early days of the Republic. Washington ran for a second term and won it easily and could have easily won a third, but he desired to retire from public life. His farewell address, which was more of a newspaper article instead of a speech, was inspired because the country had started to fracture along factional lines. We will address how this happened in a later lecture. His speech focused on several warnings to the American people. First, he encouraged Americans to not get involved in European affairs and wars, which they mainly did until the 1900s. Next, he recommended not making any permanent alliances with foreign nations because they would drag us into wars that we have no part in as a nation. Thirdly, he warns against forming political parties and how they damage the country. Lastly, he warns the people to not fall into sectionalism or supporting the region more than the country itself.
If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or clarifications you would like to make about this lecture, please leave a comment below. If you learned something new, please consider leaving a like. If you would like to receive notifications of more content like this, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell. If you would like to support this channel and creator financially, please check out the links in the description for merchandise or sites that will provide me direct financial support for the work of this channel. Thank you for your time and have a great day. Class dismissed.